Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about a very specific issue in tabletop role-playing games, and that's how to make sure that you don't have a player problem before a player problem happens. How to deal with respect at the table, how to deal with behavior you don't want at the table before it happens. All right, so this video is being done at a specific request. So I have a longtime viewer I'm very, very happy to have. I'll just call him Mike. Mike asked the question. He said, hey, recently we had to kick a player out of our group. It was a surprise to all of us. And how do you deal with this problem, right? So one, both game masters, both in the tabletop role-playing game sphere for a long time. And so I'm 100% aware of this problem. Definitely have a lot of sympathy for this issue. Definitely understand where this person is coming from the perspective of how do I deal with this, right? Well, it is a very real problem. So one, I just want to say having a problem player is a big concern in tabletop role-playing games. A lot of tables struggle to get people to come and play, right? And so that's problem number one, okay? Because tabletop role-playing games are not even remotely an easy sell. They are not an easy sell. They're a challenging sell, right? And so a lot of times people end up playing with the players they can get rather than the players they should have. They end up playing with people that they might not like their language right out of the gate. Not language as in like French or Russian, but like language as far as cursing and swearing. Terms they use for different cultures, like all kinds of problems, right? You can really run into some serious issues right out of the gate, and it can happen really fast, right? And so one, I just want to encourage all game masters out there. This isn't exclusive to you. This problem is a very real problem in the tabletop role-playing game industry overall. We all struggle with it. We all do the best we can to keep the ball moving forward, right? And just to really deal with the problem in the best possible way that we can, because it can be really challenging, right? So just be encouraged. If you've struggled with this in the past, it's really not 100% on you. This is in dealing with having problem players in your group, right? So it is a very real problem. Just understand, all of us suffer with it, right? Okay, just putting a little bit of sympathy here in the situation. So how do you deal with this, right? So one, just so you're aware, there are a lot of ways that have been put online, right? And so I'll just point you to some resources, right? The X card, if you're not aware of the X card, it's crazy simple. It's something you can put into your game. You give everybody a card with an X on it. It's literally just a 3x5 card with a Sharpie X on it, right? And then at any point in the game, any player can hold that card up and say, and when they hold that card up, it is communicating to everyone, I have a problem with what's being said right now, right? And the reality is, the way it's supposed to be dealt with, and I'm simplifying, you can read all about it online. The X card, there are literally 100+ articles on this that will explain it and go over why it's needed and how to use it and variations, all that kind of thing. So the X card is, hey, I hold up this X card, and then the game master just shuts that scene down. They may actually shut the game down if they need to, or if they're close to end, right? And then and they realize some player has caused another problem for another player, or the game master has caused a problem for the player, and at this point it needs to be addressed, right? And so what you want to do is, one, the game master, it's a red flag to the game master to see what's wrong right now, right? And so it should be curtailed. Whatever's happening should be curtailed, gracefully shut down as quickly as possible, move on to the next scene, end the session and move on to the next session next week with some time to unpack and investigate what happened, right? Now, and then you want to deal with it if it's happening. If somebody's using language, and what I mean by swear words or curse words, terms for groups of people that are completely inappropriate, insults to specific cultures, these kind of things are what would cause an X flag to be thrown, and even more serious topics, right? So the X card's here. Veils are another way this is handled. I personally don't think Veils is a good idea, only because I've read Veils, and I find it so. Another way that people deal with this, there's Veils, and then there's a third way, which is Monte Cook Games did an incredibly in-depth study of this. And essentially the way they handle this is they have like a session 0 for a session 0. Like they add an entire session to the game where like essentially you fill out a whole bunch of forms, and by the time you're done with those forms, you know what's gonna be a trigger for almost any player at the table, and then you just kind of dance around those triggers, right? That was my read. I read the whole thing. It was the effort was incredibly noble, but it really felt like something that came out of the United Nations or NATO, and the concept of it was very good, but the reality of anybody doing it, it's so extenuated and so many steps that I'm kind of like, if you're going this far, there's a good chance. I don't know. It felt like too much to me, right? This is a really needed project that continues to need to be refined and kind of coalesced, condensed, reduxed, right? Because it was so, like, when you ran through the list, it was just like, if it just really was brick upon brick upon brick, in my opinion, right? So I also think that the project was incredibly noble, because we need those projects in order to get us to the final goal, okay? So what do I do? Well, first of all, I have a few things. Well, one, I know this is going to sound crazy, but to keep a safe, respectful game, cut your freaking game from 4 hours to 2 hours, okay? If you are running a 4-hour game, you are guaranteed, almost guaranteed, to have a group of very close to old school grognards. 4-hour games are the most, in my opinion, egregious problem we have in the hobby. Because they push away creatives and people who would be excited about it, and they attract the most obsessive. 4-hour games, in my opinion, really attract grindy, high, mechanical build players who really don't have much time for narrative, creativity, artistry. I really feel the 4-hour game has become the most destructive habit our hobby has. And if you just pull it down to 2 hours, you're going to get a whole host of people who are, who have already sat through 100 movies in their lifetime and said, hey, I could do something for 2 hours. But who does anything for 4 hours, right? The only people who do this are people who are left from the 80s and the 90s, or have been kind of indoctrinated by the 80s and 90s to believe that role-playing games are indeed 4-hour activities, and they really shouldn't be. We desperately need to kill this. And so, one, right there, just cut your game down to a reasonable amount of time, and guess what? Reasonable people will play your game, right? It's a big deal, okay? Two, I'm going to give you my methods, what I use for keeping respect and a safe space at my table, okay? So, one, I run a 2-hour game. Two, when I choose who's going to play, I attempt to have a diverse play group, right? I'm not trying to just invite my friends. I'm trying to invite new people to the hobby, different genders, different preferences, different cultures, okay? So we want that in our games. We want our worlds to be robust and interesting, and we need to really work hard to put it into the game itself, okay? So that's one, is, make sure that you have some diversity within your play group, the players you're inviting. You should invite 2 to 3 players to start, not 4 or 5, okay? Bring those people in, focus on them, build a compelling world, give them the room to make narrative, okay? And then also run story arcs, okay? I run 2 to 4 session story arcs, and when that story arc is done, I invite everybody at the table to do the following: build a new character, leave the game. This is critically important, okay? Basically, and so when you invite somebody, you say, hey, would you like to come and play a story arc within my existing tabletop role-playing game? It'll be 2 to 4 sessions. And then, so what you do is you then invite everybody in, you complete the story arc, right? If that problem player was a significant problem, one, if there's a major problem, you're going to address it right there in the game. If you get the idea that this player could be a problem in the future, that they're not gelling, they don't have the same sentiment as the rest of your group, don't invite them to the next story arc, right? Tell everybody, hey, thank you very much for this, for playing in this story arc. I will let you know when the next story arc. Thank you very much for playing in this story arc. I appreciate it, right? And then cut it off there, right? And then when you build your next story arc, you invite back the players who you really enjoyed playing, and the problem players who were really on probation and just didn't know it are not invited back. Like, I do this all the time, okay? And, like, we run our games like this. Now, I run it for a whole lot of reasons. And being able to exclude a player after one story arc is just one reason I do this. It has many, many other benefits. So that's another one, is being able to cut players out. Actually giving an on and off ramp for your players, because one of your players may not be comfortable with one of the directions that, and they may say, hey, I'm gonna duck out. And them ducking out is a clue to you. So giving people a chance to leave your game is really important, right? One, it makes sure that the people who are playing from story session to story session are there for a reason, right? And they're there because they want to be there. It is critically important, okay? So those are two. And then the other thing is, the last is, should you have your own written set of rules? It's a good question. It's a very valid question. And in my opinion, the answer is yes. You absolutely should have your own valid rule set, okay? So how do you handle that, right? How do you give your own valid rule set? Well, here you go. One, don't discuss it with your players, right? You know what is appropriate at your table and what's not, right? So if you have an ongoing game, one, write your rules. So what's the first rule for your rules? 1 page. 1 page. It needs to be simple, it needs to be concise, and it needs to be clear. Write it on 1 page, right? Then print it out, give it to your players, or, you could send it to them as a PDF if you're online. Then at that point, just give it to them and say, hey, these are the rules that we are going to be using after today's session, right? So, and you could say, hey, I'm presenting these here. Now, you present it to them, you don't install it on that particular game, right? You're going to have to just use your normal game master skills to make sure that game is safe and productive, right? Which is more difficult if you don't have written rules, right? But you're going to have one session of it, right? So you're going to have this one session, and so you go ahead and you have this one session, and then at the beginning you say, these are our new rules that we are all going to be playing by starting on next session. You say, we're not going to discuss this now. You don't have to read this now, but you do have to read it before our next game. If you have any questions, contact me directly, right? And then I will take any requests for changes to this rule set and from you, and I will determine if we're going to add them or if we're not. And then at that point, you take those those suggestions, you add them, or you choose not to add them. And then you next week you come in and you say, okay, hey, here's the rules. No one contacted me directly. At this point, these rules are in effect. I expect everyone to follow these rules, and I thank you for doing so, right? And then if anybody did give changes, you don't even say who gave them. You said, there's some few amendments. Here's the amendments, so forth, right? And then at that point, you go with that rule set. But I read the Monty. By the way, the Monty Cook game article. It's available for free right now. Their section on safe gaming spaces, I really think they did the hard work that the industry needed to do, but I really felt what they did was so, it just felt so much like something that would have come out of the IRS. There were just so many forms, and it added so much to getting the game started that I don't think it's going to be used very much going forward. And I think there's already proof of that. Like there recently was a bounce out of a major industry agent, industry tabletop role playing game person with their own brand that really bounced out and was 100% aware of all the veils and X cards and safety rules, and none of it helped. And their game ended up they ended up essentially leaving the industry over one very bad mistake. So these things are very important to deal with. That is how I would suggest you deal with them. I encourage you to go take a look at the Monte Cook game material. If you think I'm wrong, if you think that it's not too much to expect for a player group, I'd love to hear you on that topic. All that's my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion on this topic. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.